So let's have a look at level three. So we're talking about grades 6, 7, and 8 here. So we're talking about some, some really nice advanced pieces of music. Obviously, we know why we're here. We know the pedagogy behind what we produced. So let's have a look at grade 6. And hopefully you're kind of recognising a bit of the theme coming on here, where we've got Mozart and Chopin and Albinitz and Debussy and Bach all kind of mixed in with Florence Price, Lexi French, and then you can see a nice Oscar Peterson track in there as well. And also worth flagging that you've got He's a Pirate from Pirates of the Caribbean, because there are a couple of pieces at level 3 where we've taken stuff from the Rock School Piano syllabus and put it into the RSL Classical syllabus, because they are the solo arrangements that I was talking about earlier, that map directly across, and it really sort of goes to demonstrate how the two things talk to each other. And of course, Klaus Badelt and Hans Zimmer's Pirates of the Caribbean. And I think the Schindler's List is grade 8, and the other one is the E.T. theme from the contemporary as well. These are solo arrangements that are from film and TV and are essentially 21st century contemporary classical works that appear in our contemporary syllabus. So you can see there's a kind of a coherence and a consistency across the two. Let's have a look at a bit of Chopin. Can't really do an RSL classical. You can't do a classical syllabus without including Chopin, who was the man for looking at really exploring what the capabilities of what the piano could do, taking the classical forms that were basically established by Haydn, then experimented with and extended to a certain level by Beethoven, then taken to a whole other level by Chopin, who at this point was really pushing the limits of rhythm, tonality, and the capability of the piano itself to create really dramatic and technical music. And of course, in that regard, it's really testing the demands of the musician, the pianist as well. And Chopin preferred performing works in kind of to private concerts in people's houses rather than the concert hall. So a lot of what he was doing was not only showing off his ability to write music, but actually his ability to play as a virtuoso musician. So piece has been very carefully selected to work at grade 6, 7, and 8. This piece of music sits nicely at the grade 6 level. You can see that obviously it's grade 6, so the benchmarking criteria includes 6 sharps and flats. This one has got 4 sharps and flats, which obviously A flat, A flat major and F minor, and refers back to the grade 4 syllabus. So we'll have a listen in. I think you can see there how, again, as I mentioned, the pedal markings have been included because they're intrinsic to putting the right style and expression across. And it's worth noting this section here in the third system, where you've got the spread chord there, which you can cope with actually, depending on how big or small your hands are, and of course the fact the chords are stretching across systems as well, which in the first instant looks quite demanding, but actually it's a case of decoding what's on the score and then looking at how technically you can play, because they're not massively complicated triads, but they've got some really interesting accidentals, the inclusion of a sneaky little F flat there, for example. So let's have a listen to this piece of music. And obviously being able to portray the mazurka style, which is obviously very important for this particular piece of music. But again, this making reference to this last system, the fact that we are in 3/4, which is essentially a straightforward time signature, but at this point, upsetting the rhythm, it doesn't feel or sound as if it's in 3/4 at all. So that's quite a nice thing for students to get their heads around. Just a note, there have been questions around repeats, and repeats have been written in, and repeats should be played. Because it's part of the demands of being able to play for an extended period of time as you go through the different grades, and obviously being able to repeat and be able to play with the consistency of style when you play the first and the second time. Mentioned Oscar Peterson, very, very well known, very prolific Canadian jazz musician, fantastic performer, composer, and technician. And this is a piece of music, as it won't surprise you to see, Jazz Exercise Number 2, quite clearly is designed as a piece of music to kind of teach students the various different sort of piano playing techniques that are required to be a great jazz musician. And there's lots of things you can draw it from here when it comes to preparing for the interpretation and the improvisation, in terms of taking short little elements and how they've been extended and varied as you go through. One example is the first bar. We've got the triplet and then quaver figuration here, repeated here, but with an extension on the same chord, which is a lovely example. And then, of course, the triplet figuration working as a descending sort of jazz scale-like position here, which, if you've ever looked at any kind of jazz piano playing techniques, this is quite a classic improvisational technique that's employed. Let's have a listen so you can hear what sort of things students need to be able to demonstrate when they're working on this piece. Great little track. Nice steady left hand groove, not dissimilar to the groove established in the Cheshire Cat at grade 3, but with significant more advanced stuff going on the right hand side, and being able to have the technique to put that kind of lyrical, almost vocal quality to the articulation, which is unique to jazz in this regard. Now let's have a look at a piece of music by Florence Price. Very, very well respected composer, teacher, performer. Written across the board for orchestra, solo, piano and silent films. This is Silk Hat and Walking Cane, which is the third movement in a suite called Dances in the Cane Breaks, all of which have got a very strong flavour of kind of a combination of Western classical and jazz traditions kind of merging together really to create this really interesting style. And you can see it's one flat, it's 2/4, so, and it's only 70 beats per minute, so on the face of it relatively straightforward, and certainly drawing on the skills that have been developed in previous grades. But within that there's intricate complexities that have been built in, which shows the students developing technical agility. Again, you've got the internal kind of rhythmic melody here going on while sustaining the F minim again here, and then these semi-quaver runs which are sort of built around the pentatonic all the time, while keeping this kind of slightly simplified left-hand stride piano going on, which actually is a lovely warm-up for the Scott Joplin rag that appears at grade 8. So let's have a listen to this one. let's have a look at the technical exercises at grade 6. As I mentioned, it's F sharp and G flat major, which obviously the particularly observant of you will notice that they are essentially the same scale. They're just n harmonics of each other, which is great because it means that when you're looking at these level 3 qualifications, you can really get to grips with the technical exercises, the technical studies and the repertoire, and knowing that the scales you've got to do, essentially whether you're asked to play F sharp major or G flat major, they're essentially the same. You're playing standard and contrary motion, but it's developing the student's ability to be able to read both in sharp keys and flat keys. I know from my own experience that I'm much happier if I've got a key signature that's got 6 sharps in it as opposed to 6 flats. Shouldn't make any difference, but it does. And so you've got the relative minors as well, D sharp and E flat, and of course in pentatonic. And you can see the chromatic scale starting with any black note, hands together, but there's a wide range of octaves. Don't want to gloss over the introduction of contrary motion, by the way. That is in the technical skills and definitely something to note. The other thing to note is as well, the arpeggios, as well as having the standard major and minor, you've also got the dominance of G7 and F7, chosen specifically for those two because it's chords 5 and 4 in the home key of C major, so it's kind of a fairly I guess it's probably a fairly easy arpeggio to kind of get your head around when you're looking at sort of sevenths for the first time. You can see the technical studies again. I've just given you an example of the second technical study to show the kind of detail that's being brought in now as we get to grade 6. Lots of things to engage with, changes of time signature. And then you've got the 200 beats per minute as well, so we're not messing about in terms of kind of the student's ability to play at quite an advanced level. And it's important to note that whether you're going through the performance certificate or the graded music exam, there is an expectation that students, as they're learning how to play pieces of music, and yes, there are always going to be moments where there are going to be things that are particularly challenging, but I think to avoid students kind of getting in the habit of finding workarounds to compensate for a lack of technique is fairly important, because we want to ensure that that students are developing as good technical players, so they're not limited later on. But please do note the wording of the assessment criteria for accuracy and understanding when it comes to the repertoire pieces, when it talks about a suitable interpretation of the written notation that is still musically, that essentially reflects the technical and musical demands of the particular piece of music, which, coming back to the question about students with smaller hands, that's the bit to really to have a look at and take note of. Let's have a look at grade 7 now. Some really interesting piece of music in here. We've got another Mazurka by Chopin, so you can see the kind of the different level and the very careful way in these pieces be selected to benchmark to the right level. I mentioned we've got the theme from Schindler's List, which is in our grade 7 rock school piano syllabus as well, and we've got people like Michael Nyman, Agatha Backer, Grondal appearing as well, together with Germaine Taillefer. And then you've got another Chopin piece here and a bit of Schubert as well. So let's have a look at the Schubert now. Moment musico, the Allegretto moderato. There are editions out there that talk about this being Allegro moderato, but Allegretto moderato is the particular edition that we've decided to use, and it's probably the most accurate description of the tempo that this piece we think needs to be played at. Schubert is a really interesting composer, and one that students should at least be aware of in his role in taking, similar to Beethoven really, taking classical forms and then extending the language and moving the language into a romantic form, particularly in the realms of piano music. And again paved the way for sort of Chopin and Liszt to start doing significantly more flamboyant works later on. We're talking about grade 7, so we've got some unusual time signatures. 7 sharps and flats could be there, and the technical demands really come to the fore here, where you've got the sort of interaction both between the hands and the fingers, but also their coordination and independence as well. And then there's technical dexterity and a lightness of touch, both of which are really important. And the complexity of the chord groupings across the clefs and the handspan, and things like where you've got these sort of fast moving parallel thirds going on here is a nice example. And again, this second bar, bar 7 on the second system, where you've got kind of like the melody, plus you've got an internal slur putting in, highlighting the kind of both the harmonic movement and the stylistic flavour, and a little grace note added in on top as well. So 4 flats, but with G flats, A flat, G flats written all over the place, A natural going to A flat. So lots of things for the students to be aware of that kind of really set us out as a grade 7 style piece. You go, especially recorded abridged version for this webinar that doesn't include the repeats. It's different to the exemplar audio you get with the book. Let's look at Vaucelon by Taillefer. Very, very interesting composer. Actually, one of the only female member of Les Six, the group of composers that included Poulenc, Milo, Dury and Georges Auric, for example. But she's sort of less well known than the others, which I think tells you everything you need to know really about gender and issues in classical music. So really, really pleased to be able to bring this piece of music into the syllabus. She's very a huge amount of stuff. I mean, one of the things that she was commissioned to write a ballet for Diaghilev, which is obviously Stravinsky famously had 3 ballets commissioned by the very famous Russian ballet. And you can hear in this piece of music kind of the influence of composers of her contemporaries and composers working before her, and particularly Erik Satie's Gymnopédie you can hear, and her own sort of distinctive compositional style, which is sort of generally quite tonal, but has some very interesting harmonic elements going on. You can see that in the 3rd and sort of 4th systems here. Really interesting piece of music and great to engage with. There we go. And you just heard in the air a sneaky little extended kind of jazz / impressionist sort of extended chord going on there, highlighting kind of the influence and the friendship she had with Ravel and the influence of Debussy. Let's now look at deep sleep playing. This is from the acclaimed film The Piano, which Michael Nyman obviously famously wrote the renowned and award-winning soundtrack. My Heart Asked Pleasure First, possibly one of his most famous pieces, certainly for solo piano, and from the same film. Nyman himself talks about the fact he kind of loves writing opera, but actually the music he's written for his own band and for solo piano is fantastic. Very, very much in the minimalist style, with a 21st century flavour. Technically and physically demanding, which you can probably see on the page in front of you. And again, pedalling being included to demonstrate its integral role to kind of how this piece of music needs to come across. I think this is another example where really being able to listen to the exemplar audio that comes with the book is really important. So students can use that together with replay and the learning platform to slow sections down, to practice particular bits, incrementally increasing the tempo so they can get their fingers around it all, and they can both hear how it should be interpreted as well as what's written on the page, because there's always a bit of a limit to what you can put on the page when you're putting across particular intentions. And we are looking for students to kind of develop their own musical voice at this stage when it comes to style and expression, particularly that they've got inside this piece of music, understood where it's come from, what the composer's original intentions are, and then communicating all those different things in their own playing. So let's have a listen, and you can hear what a fantastic piece this is. I think the subtle and sneaky little use of cross rhythm, just here in bar 10, and then again later on, is a really lovely thing to the students get their fingers round. And certainly, while it can in the performance itself comes across as, you know, as nothing particularly significant, actually getting your right hand to be able to play those triplet figurations over and over again with rhythmic assurity, and then to put the left hand melody underneath, takes a fair bit of work. And I think the learning platform and replay, very, very helpful resources in that regard. We can just sort of keep playing it slower and then gradually speed it up and have it on a loop. Grade 7 technical exercises. Again, like grade 6, you'll see that you've got kind of the 7 sharps and flats, C sharp and C flat major. C flat major is the same as B major, just written out differently. And then you've got A sharp and A flat natural harmonic and melodic minor. And then and then you've also got to play the C major in thirds. So this is a new development where you have to be able to play scale in thirds, both right hand and left hand separately, kept in the key of C major to ensure that it's not too complicated. And then also you need to be able to play a chromatic scale a third apart as well. And you'll find that there's kind of, there's similar sorts of things come across in other syllabuses. So we've made sure that they're kind of mapped across quite nicely. And then the arpeggios, you've got the addition of D7 and B flat 7 in there. And then an example of the technical studies on the right hand side. Where you've got, that's one particular example, and that's only a short excerpt. So they are longer, and again, 3 distinct different styles. This one very much focused on kind of like a jazz playing technique, hence the chord symbols written over the top. And moving on to grade 8, here we have the range of composers involved. We've got everything from Bach, Grieg, Debussy, Beethoven, Poulenc, Clara Schumann, and then we've got Scott Joplin and Bill Evans in there as well. Interestingly, that we're crediting Bill Evans in the repertoire list for Blue and Green, but we're also crediting it with Miles Davis as well. As we look at this piece in a bit of detail, you'll see why that is shortly. But let's have a look at the Clara Schumann piece of music, an impromptu. So a beautiful example of kind of the Romantic era piano playing, where you've got designed essentially to be a standalone piece of music. Yes, it sits within a collection, but can stand alone as a piece of music designed just purely as a showpiece to evoke a particular emotion and to show off the musician's technical facility. Schumann herself, of course, was a very, very highly regarded performer and composer, and then, of course, happened to marry Robert Schumann himself, a highly successful composer and performer. So between the two of them, they were a bit of a musical power couple, going around the place, being really quite brilliant. And this is a lovely example, and been benchmarked to sit at grade 8, because at this stage, students need to be able to play really in any time and key signature, all sorts of sudden and rapid changes of key, tempo, mood and modulation, wide range of tempo markings, and the technical agility, which means that essentially, as we were talking about earlier, they can be put into any musical situation and cope with the demands that are presented in front of them. So let's have a listen to this track now. And if ever there was a piece of music that needs to demonstrate your ability to play Aki Akachuras, that was it. I also want to highlight these figurations in bar 3, bar 4, etc. We've talked about the accuracy and understanding assessment criteria and the way you can look at the way notation is played to create a appropriate appropriate sounding kind of musical interpretation of the score that also demonstrates a technical facility. I think this is a very, very good case in point where an examiner looks closely at the accuracy interpretation, because Clara Schumann haven't taken the trouble to put in these demi-semi-quaver rests. It's really quite important that the whole staccato flavour of the piece isn't lost, and that these rests are there because they're notated and so therefore need to be included. So that's an example where you do need to look carefully at what the notation is telling and adhere to it as closely as you possibly can to ensure you can maximise the marks. Let's have a look at Blue and Green. As I said, credited by both Bill Evans and Miles Davis. It depends who you talk to. The piece first appeared on Miles Davis's Kind of Blue album by the jazz trumpet player Miles Davis, because it was his album. He basically took the writing credit, but Bill Evans, as the pianist in the sextet, who then later went on to form his own trio called the Bill Evans Trio and had a huge amount of success. Bill Evans, it appears in his album Portraits in Jazz in 1960. So one could argue that it's actually Bill Evans wrote the piece of music. So it's an interesting question about how all of that stuff works within the music industry, which is useful for musicians to understand and get to know as they move into that particular industry. What is interesting from this piece of music from a musical point of view is the fact that it sits beautifully within the cool jazz style, which was a direct reaction to the bebop that had happened earlier with the likes of Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker in the 40s, which itself was a reaction to the big band swing era, where there were African American musicians that were kind of reclaiming back a style of music in jazz, which had sort of been dominated by band leaders, and that's another really interesting cultural and sociological conversation you can have when it looks at exploring different pieces of music, and something we absolutely categorically wanted to address in this particular syllabus. Benchmarking criteria is all there, and I think you have a look, because it's cool jazz. The tempo is really quite slow, but that means that it gives the performer a lot of opportunity to focus on how they're playing and the stylistic approach and the subtleties in terms of playing the thing like an A13 sharp 9 chord, for example, how that is played to really put the harmonic sense of that across, so that the notes are played with the right level of articulation to put across the composer's intentions, and little things like these triplet movements as well. All very, very interesting things. And if they've gone through the Oscar Peterson jazz study at grade 6, this is a great little step up from there. So let's have a listen. And you get a little hint there as I played it on how the piece evolves and becomes technically more demanding as the music goes through. Now let's look at Francis Poulenc, who I've referenced a couple of times. Lied Fair, part of Les Six, a group of influential 20th century musicians and composers that all met at the Paris Conservatoire. Paris Conservatoire, of course, being one of the musical cultural capitals, one of the places to go and study music throughout the kind of the sort of 19th and 20th century, and still now, of course. This is written as a solo piano suite, really popular for performers and audiences, although Poulenc himself didn't really rate it very much. But the movement perpetuel gives you a sense of what's going on here. Basically, it's perpetual movement, perpetual motion, and it's a really interesting piece of music and lots of intricate details for the musician to get their head round. Let's have a listen. Mention in the information provided on the screen in the right hand corner there, the fact this music was regarded as a bit light-hearted in his home country of France, but there's a lot of humour written into his music, and he's taken you can hear here, one of his styles is to take kind of standard Western classical tonality where it all sort of seems to fit together quite nicely, and then just completely upsetting it by chucking in dissonances all over the place. So, and the way that Debussy kind of extended harmony in one direction, Poulenc kind of extended harmony and tonality in a different direction. You can see there's a sort of a bit of a theme with his fellow musicians who are part of Les Six, which is part of the reason why they're all grouped together. Let's now have a look at Beethoven. Again, there's no excuses for the fact he appears quite a few times. He's a deeply, obviously, influential musician. You'll see that that Capers appears a number of times. Alexis French appears a number of times as well, and they've been included because of the amount of music they've got that sort of just suits the performers they're developing, their style. So let's have a listen to this one first of all, and then we'll look at a few details around it in a second. And you'll note that by the time we got to grade 8, that the pieces of music are significantly longer. We're talking about playing the whole of the first movement rather than a for the example, the Fur Elise, which was an abridged version for the earlier grade, because students being able to play for a sustained period of time is one thing, but also being able to play a whole movement to demonstrate they've got the technical facility and the musical understanding to be able to do that amount of music justice is key. Lots of things for the student to get their heads around here. You've got kind of the ornamentation in the third system. You've got the kind of the Mozart sort of flavour in the second system here, and then the things that are classically Beethoven in terms of the sudden contrast and changes of mood, which means that they need to be able to play soft with a soft light touch when they're playing this kind of monophonic melody here, and then dropping the chords in underneath with the right emphasis, as well as being able to play with a really strong kind of heavy sort of Beethoven flavour in this fourth system as well. So even on that first page, before you go any further on, there's lots of different techniques on display that the candidate has kind of developed over time and is able to demonstrate at this point by the time they get to grade 8. Just to note on the technical exercises now, again, I've given you an example of the technical study. As one there, you can see the others. They're all in the technical exercises, which you can download. By the time you get to grade 8, as I said, they're playing the scales and arpeggios from memory. By this stage, they could be asked to play any scale from any previous exam syllabus. So anything from C major all the way through to C flat minor. And they've also got these lovely sneaky little scales, C half whole diminished, and the C whole tone scale. Like the pentatonics, these are scales that you don't automatically associate with the Western classical tradition if you're looking at the likes of kind of Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert. But when you start to look at people like Debussy, Poulenc, you start to look at Taillefer, you look at Richter, and of course you look at the jazz composers as well. You'll find that these scales do appear, and of course, as a grade 8 musician, you want to be able to explore music from a wide range of different styles. So to be able to understand how these different tonalities work together is really important. Like the scales, the arpeggios, any from a previous grade. Then you've also got diminished seventh arpeggios to be included. These are C, C sharp, and D. And then you've also got the dominant sevenths, G, D, A, F, B flat, and E flat, which may appear to be a bit of a random selection, but if you consider that actually that's just taking you around the circle of fifths, it sort of begins to make a bit of sense. If you start on there in the key of C, you go around, and that's where you get. And of course, the circle of fifths is a very, very important harmonic device used in Western classical music, particularly by the likes of Beethoven and Mozart, when they're talking about the development sections in sonata form as a way of moving from one key to another. And the reason I've taken a moment to mention that is because grade 8 is a level of demand that is equivalent to the level 3 VQs and IGCSE, International Baccalaureate and A level. And certainly when it comes to analysing set works at A level, then being able to recognise the circle of fifths is really important. So as a performance musician, being able to recognise how that's being used in piece of music they're playing has wider impact when it comes to them writing their own music or recognising it when they're analysing someone else's work, and definitely speeds up their ability to learn a piece of music because they start to recognise those patterns both written down on the page and orally. So that's why those are there, and obviously that harks back to our fundamental philosophy that we are developing not just highly qualified, highly skilled performers, but actually wider than that, it's highly skilled musicians, which is why, of course, the general musicianship questions are key to everything that goes on. I'm going to just leave the links there as we come towards the end of these webinars, and I just want to say thank you very, very much for joining us today. I hope you found the session informative. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.